Joining me now is former White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney. Good to see you, Mick. Where to start? It's always hard to know with Trump, but perhaps let's start on his latest tweet, and that is on, his truth, on Truth Social. He said that he's going to make a big announcement when it comes to pharmaceuticals. Now, we're really interested in that here in Australia because we have the pharmaceutical benefit schemes. Of course, cheaper medicines is a core part of our system. What might that mean for us? What might it mean in total?
Yeah, well, apparently it's going to be a busy week for big announcements because he's also talking about an announcement on a China trade deal. But looking at pharmaceuticals, my guess is, and it's an educated guess, Laura, because we dealt with this a good bit in the first term, is he's going to announce a new sort of regime here, or at least an attempt to get to a new regime where American government services won't pay more than foreign government services for pharmaceuticals. This is a big deal. Right now, our government pays dramatically more for drugs than other countries do, and it's always bothered Trump. And what he's going to say is, look, you can only charge the American government what you charge the Australians or the British, whoever the cheapest is. It's called a most favored nation approach, but really what it is trying to put pressure on other countries to either raise what they're paying for drugs or to put pressure on pharmaceutical companies to charge more to other countries for their drugs.
Right, okay, that seems a bit of a terrifying prospect for our current leadership here, but that's something we're going to have to deal with along with all the other tariffs that are being imposed. What about China? Because we keep on hearing, we see this high-stakes game of chicken between America and China at the moment. Where does all of this end up, do you think? And what do you make of the signals coming out of the White House right now?
Well, I think it ends up at a deal of some sort. Keep in mind, I think in the last 24 hours, Scotty Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, has mentioned that there's going to be a big deal coming. I think Trump has hinted at that as well. Laura, I don't put much credence in that there might be sort of an introduction to a deal, but this is a very, very complicated relationship, very complex trading terms. There's no way they have a comprehensive deal already. They just announced a deal with the UK last week. Now it's turning out that that's more of a term sheet, a sort of a summary, a memorandum of understanding, as opposed to a final deal. I do not expect them to have a final deal with the Chinese. The Trump team is eager to point out to people they are cutting deals, they are negotiating, that they are trying to get more fair trading arrangements with our partners overseas. But I don't think you're going to see any final deals here anytime soon.
Yeah, well, that's a really worrying prospect for ordinary Americans and those running small businesses that rely on getting their goods out of China, obviously. So there's a real inflation story. There's a real middle class story there in America with prices of everything going up there. Does it get to a point where Americans realise that actually America needs China more than China needs it?
No, because I don't think that's true. I think it's a mutual assured destruction. Both countries need each other. Honestly, I think the Chinese can put their people through more deprivation domestically than we can here. So I actually think the Chinese have a little bit of an upper hand in the negotiations from that standpoint. I don't think that means they have an upper hand across all of the negotiations, but at least on how much pain can you put your own people through, the Chinese clearly can do it. They're not a democracy and so forth. It's going to be very complicated. It was before 8 years ago when we dealt with this. To think that it's going to be easy now. Look, they cut a deal with the British. The British don't have Taiwan to worry about. They don't have geopolitics to worry about. They don't have the South China Sea to talk about. They don't have sort of a hegemony in Asia to worry about. It was easy, relatively speaking, to get a deal with the British. It's going to be very complicated to get a deal with the Chinese.
So what's the KPI here for success for Trump, do you think? If everything goes to plan with this trade war with China and America for argument's sake, got everything it wanted, I'm still not clear about what Trump's end game actually is here. In 2 years' time, if there is a reindustrialisation of America, more manufacturing coming out of the Rust Belt, is that the KPI?
I think it's a fair question, and you'd be guessing unless you sort of look back through history at what Trump has said in the past. In 2000, it was either 17 or 18, he was at the G7 meetings in Canada, and the Europeans were giving him a really hard time about his trade policies at the time. And he said, look, here's what I want. 0, 0, 0. Zero tariffs, zero non-tariff barriers, zero government subsidies. Let's just trade. Everybody on a flat playing surface. I think if you ask Donald Trump what is his end game, what would be a perfect result, I think that would be it. You don't tax our stuff. We don't tax your stuff. Let's trade. I don't think you'll get there. It's very difficult to get there with any country. The closest country I think we've been to that with is Australia. And still see we're struggling with that relationship. So I don't think you get there with China. But you asked me a question, what does pure victory look like for Donald Trump? I think it would be at that pure level playing field.
Yeah, okay. So Australia, we're still wanting to negotiate, get the best deal for us. Of course, every country wants that for themselves. Do you think Trump will start doing special deals on the side, or is it still at that stage where it's, kind of blanket and all the focus is on China?
No, I think you started to see the side negotiations. I was very pleased to see sort of at least the announcement of progress with the UK, the term sheet, let's call it for sake of this discussion. That means those conversations are going on. I know for a fact, because I've seen the people going into the building at Treasury, that Vietnam and South Korea and Japan have been in town to negotiate deals. We know that the Prime Minister of Italy was in town a couple of weeks ago, Meloni, to talk about a deal with Italy, which is hard to do because they're inside the European Union. So I certainly think there's discussions going on. I think if there's anything, if Australia is sort of a little bit behind the curve, it was because of the election. And as we talked about last week, now that that's been settled, and now that Albanese and Trump have had a good conversation, maybe we get things kickstarted there as well.
Yeah, as we said, Trump loves a winner, and Anthony Albanese is certainly that on this side of the election. One question I put to the Treasurer in the Treasurer's debate in the election campaign is this thing we need to consider here in Australia, that might we have to decide between the biggest trading partner and our closest ally being the US and China. Might Trump force that choice upon us, do you think? Because I remember back in the Obama administration, came out in Joe Hockey's memoir. I also interviewed him about it. Obama essentially asked him in no uncertain terms for us to stop selling iron ore to China. And obviously the answer is no. But with someone like Trump, that could come up again, could it not?
It could. But to ask your threshold, answer your threshold question, a relationship between the U.S. and a relationship with China. And I know I'm biased, as you can tell by the wall behind me and the accent I'm speaking with. Okay, I think a bad deal with the Americans is still better than a good deal with the Chinese. I just do. I mean, I don't know how you trust the Chinese long term. I get the part about conversations now about folks saying, can we trust the Americans and so forth? And yes, we're going to go through an interesting sort of reset right now. But still, the relationship is so much deeper and so much longer and so much closer. I think a bad deal with the Americans is better than a good deal with the Chinese. I hope we get a great deal with the Americans and the Australians. But if you don't, I still think that that's better than the alternative.
Mick Mulvaney, we need a whole hour to talk to you. We'll speak to you soon. Enjoy South Carolina. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Laura.